Thank you. So I'm so happy to be here again, and I thank Connections for inviting me to participate in this virtual Summer Institute with all of you. I have to sort of chuckle because the virtual piece can be a little tricky, right? Um, I don't, you're probably thinking like, oh, she should replace that furniture or who knows what. You can't help but be, kind of in my house with me here. However, I also don't know what's going on your end. I would love to, I have no idea. I got a hint yesterday when somebody kind of broke through and clearly had a love of country music. So, so in the worst case scenario, I'm really just talking to myself. But I'm hoping that this topic will be of interest to many of you. For that reason, if you have comments or anything you want to put in the chat, that would be great because to feel a little more connected to you, I think that's probably the way that's going to happen. In the meantime, Jen or Becky or whomever, if anybody wants to interrupt at some point, if there is a question, I think it's important to address it as it comes up, and then there'll be more questions at the end. If you have them, I'll allow more time. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about my history as an O&M specialist. O&M, orientation and mobility. So I was a teacher of the visually impaired. I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, have been for 150 years. But when I began working at the University of Pittsburgh, I worked with a person, George Zimmerman, who was a very passionate O&M person. I taught most of the vision courses, and George taught the O&M courses pretty much. I had no interest in becoming an O&M specialist. I knew I wanted to become a developmental specialist. I knew other things I wanted to do, but O&M never really appealed to me. I kind of under duress, pressure from the person I worked with, decided, yes, I would certainly become O&M certified. And what I can tell you is that it was one of the best decisions of my life because I think trying to understand the needs of a child with CVI without thinking about them as a total person in their environment is really selling them very short. I also have come to recognize that we can learn so much about the way a person uses their vision once we have them push away from the tabletop and find out how they understand space. So I'm coming to you with this as a person who was initially not suspicious of O&M, but not sure it was really for me. The joke was, if some of you know Bonnie Dotson Burke, she's a phenomenal O&M specialist, and she lives in my community here in Pittsburgh. And when we worked together 50 years ago in the public school system, Bonnie would try to encourage me to become an O&M specialist, and I kept telling her it was really bad for my footwear. I really didn't imagine I wanted to tromp around in the rain. Again, so ridiculously simplistic. So I come to you with this topic as a person who was convinced, not because I had this lifelong, deep-seated desire to become an O&M specialist, but by learning O&M, I recognized how much I needed to learn in order to really support kids. So I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, here it is. Okay. And I think you can all see that, right? So the thrust of this presentation is one in which we will look at O&M, orientation and mobility, through the lens of children with CVI and the needs that children with CVI have. I could have called the title of this could have been Orientation and Mobility for Students with CVI. It's not business as usual. So not only did I have to sort of know some things about O&M to approach this, but then I had to do the thing that we all have to do sometimes, which is unlearn what we know about visual impairment in order to learn the special information about children with CVI. So the first part will be just a very, very brief introduction to O&M for individuals with CVI. Some of the content from this presentation will come from the chapter in Advanced Principles that I co-wrote with Alicia Waugh. But the primary source for this content comes from the work I did for Foundations of Orientation and Mobility, the 4th edition, which is in press. It has not yet come out. So this is, hot off the presses, as it were. No, not even off the presses, hot off my brain. So what is O&M? Well, and also, I think I mentioned yesterday to most, I don't know if most of you were here or not when I talked yesterday, but I had to lobby very, very hard to get O&M in the Foundations book as a standalone chapter. People who are really esteemed individuals in O&M did not quite understand why this should be its own topic and why it's different for children with O&M or with CVI. And it took a lot of convincing that it was important that this population of children sort of followed their own set of rules, their own protocol. It was not an easy sell. So I got, the chapter made it into Foundations, the 3rd edition. I think it was the last chapter in the 2nd volume. And progress has been made because now it is the 2nd to last chapter in the 2nd volume. So we're making progress. So what is O&M? It stands for Orientation in Space, and then Safe and Efficient Travel Through Space. I think most of the public thinks about O&M as the second part. How do you get from point A to point B? Do you use a dog? Do you use a cane? How do you get there? And that is a big consideration. But the orientation in space part is the part that I think is so fascinating and so often left undiscussed and without consideration, especially for students with CVI. I also want to say that this presentation is really focusing on children with complex needs. And I, at no time, regardless of the children that you see in these slides, at no time am I talking only about children who have independent mobility. I'm also talking about children who need to be moved through space with assistance. So for whom is O&M intended? It's for individuals with visual impairment or blindness with an ocular cause. It's also for children with a brain-based cause or cortical visual impairment. All students with visual impairment are eligible to be evaluated, to be evaluated for services by an O&M specialist. So if you are identified as having a visual impairment, you do qualify for an evaluation. That's a very important thing for families to know and for teams to know, that receiving services is another decision. But the first decision is one that is really based on the fact that you have visual impairment. You qualify for an evaluation. Notice I didn't say at what age. This is not something that we only offer to students who are on their way to college or on their way to technical school. Babies can get orientation and mobility. Okay, states do have individual guidelines for eligibility. So, who actually receives O&M? Becky Hammer, I want you to look really carefully at this photograph. There will be variability of who receives O&M due to local policies and practices. Priorities may be in the direction of ambulatory academic learners. Training in CVI requires specific principles that may be inconsistently taught at the pre-service level. So what I'm saying is that those people in that photograph, one of whom you may know, received their pre-service training with without really a mention of CVI. Not a mention. I hope it's different than that now. And given the fact that the Foundation's book is including CVI as its own chapter, I hope that that has changed to some degree. But I would love to know your perspectives. I'd love to know what your experience is relative to this. I also know that O&M specialists are in high demand and that there's a great need, but not enough people to serve this need. I know that. I know that. Okay. So I'll just tell you about this picture. So I am the person on the, as you look at this picture on the far right, and these were my two colleagues that were in my little pod for training. And our instructor is the gentleman there in the middle. His name is Mike Peeney.
Hello.
And we almost killed him. We almost killed him. We were really hard on him because we were a really challenging group. Okay. All right. And you can tell that picture wasn't taken yesterday. Let's consider some data here. So I have a program, a project at, I'm in the last few days of the project being in the hospital where I have been for 31 years, and the project Pediatric View is about to move to the Children's Home of Pittsburgh. But I've been keeping data for quite a while. And the data are collected on every single child that I see. And they are all de-identified. So, there's no way for anybody who sees the data bank to know who these data belong to. But in a sample of this, because we have more than 1,000 people in the data bank, but this is of the data that I feel are really reliably analyzed. Individuals 3 months to 21 years are included in this data bank. The data currently are being finalized by an independent researcher, actually from the, I think CDC actually is the person where the person works their day job. And the preliminary results show that less than 25% of the children that I have seen at Pediatric View who have CVI have ever received O&M services, ever. For a day, a week, a month, their whole life, any choice, have ever. This is why I'm so grateful to all of you who came to this session, because my fear is that people would say, but that doesn't apply to me. That doesn't apply to my students. My students can't walk. My students aren't going to go anywhere by themselves. They don't need O&M. That's a very slanted view of what O&M really is. And that's this percentage is kind of like, it kind of reminds me of this old concept that O&M is for people who are college bound or on their way to technical school. And that's never been really the case. Okay. This is, there's an article that was published this year. And in 2021, the primary author is Sarah Blackstone. And it was there's quite a few articles that are actually going to come out as a result of a big research emphasis that they've placed on the students that they see at the Bridge School. But this is information that they got from a survey in which they asked people, parents, providers, other people, about children getting supportive services from various specialists. Okay. And this shows the breakdown of the service provider on the left side: speech, vision, OT, special ed teacher, O&M specialist, PT, and behavioral therapist. Okay. And you'll see that the numbers vary there somewhat. And you see that if you look across, you'll see that the breakdown was, the questions were, is your child receiving this service daily, as they might with the special education teacher, for example, weekly, monthly, consult only, or none? Have a look at orientation and mobility specialist. 47% in the last column, 47% have received none. That's better than the data I've collected, but still, 47% never received it. 10% receive it monthly, and 24% receive it weekly. So that's a very concerning finding, in my opinion. I think it's a very concerning finding. So I have to say, there's latency here.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we have a problem.
I just love that I learned how to do that. Okay, so and the reason I had to put movie Apollo 13, because that's actually not exactly the quote that happened in the space capsule. But we do have a problem. We definitely have a problem, because we're seeing children who are visually impaired. I received a call today from a family, pretty desperate, because their child, who is ambulatory, is verbal, is in sort of somewhat academic programming, is moving to a middle school. And not only has he been removed from all vision services and all O&M services, and at one point he got some of each, but he's not even going to be given time to be oriented to his new building. This is just unconscionable. I think it comes from, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, I think it comes from two things. One, not everybody thinks CVI is a bona fide visual impairment. And the second one is, not everybody knows what to do. Okay, so it is, Houston, we do have a problem. So let's talk a little bit about travel and orientation abilities. Sorry, cat here. So I want you to now think about this, and we're going to refer to this from time to time in our little bit of time together this afternoon. Think about whether your child or your student with CVI is which of these kind of traveler are they? And I want you to get the picture of all the students you work with, those in wheelchairs, those who walk, those who, who can move themselves in a gait trainer, those who cannot, all of them. And ask yourself, kind of go through a little checklist and ask yourself, are they a rote, or a large space traveler? A rote traveler is a person who has very limited abilities to orient themselves in space. They are the person who has to go from point A to point B the same exact way every time. They might even need assistance while doing it, but there's no creativity in this. This is a memorized, route. It's a memorized path that they follow, and nothing in it can vary. Okay, so when you move to a new town, if you do this, when I first moved to Pittsburgh, which is one of the world's most difficult cities to learn to get around because we have 3 rivers, I was pretty much a rote traveler. If I had to go downtown Pittsburgh and I could only do it one way, I knew one way to go. This is before GPS, by the way. And if I couldn't go that way, I was pretty scared I was going to have to turn around in Iowa because I would get that lost. A route traveler has greater abilities. A route traveler has more flexibility moving from point A to point B, but they also may understand a parallel route that would get them there, or an alternate route that would get them there. So I watched a video of a young lady with CVI using her cane, leaving physical therapy, and she could demonstrate 2 different ways to meet her mother in the waiting area. 2 different ways to get there. That's a route traveler. She's got a sense of this space, and she has some flexibility within it. A large space traveler is someone who is actually seeing the space from a bird's eye view. They're able to perceive this area with all of its detail and all of the alternatives. They are a person who has tremendous flexibility in their ability to move through an environment. A large space traveler can encounter a detour and not be upset because they can go into their memory bank and think, okay, I have option A, B, or C to do this. And not only that, they will actually understand temporal relations such that they will be able to tell you which one of these routes will be longer and shorter. which would take more time, which would take less time. A large space traveler is a person who has tremendous flexibility in their ability to move within an environment. So we often talk about the person who, this is something I'm sure you've heard before, this example, but a person who has CVI is like a person like you. If you're in a new city and you take a taxi from the airport, you take an Uber, you take somebody else is driving you, and all you have to do is go along for the ride. You really can check your email on your phone, you can do whatever you want, because you're gathering almost no information. You're really, and honestly, you have put yourself totally in that person's hands. Okay, you are not aware really of any of the responsibilities of how you have to get somewhere. What I would like our students to do is move from the back seat into the driver's seat, hypothetically. Because if you are activated, if you are proactive, if you have initiative about where you are in space, you gather so much more information. And so one of the questions that O&M people say when they declare that a student doesn't need services is that they will declare that this child can do just fine getting from their classroom to the cafeteria or back. They're fine. But the issue is, how did they do it? Do they gather information along the way? Can they describe to you? Can they reproduce it? Can they show you what landmarks exist along that way? Or are they passively just being moved through space like robots? Okay, so there are some basic principles of O&M that have been used and refined for years. So these basic principles make up most of the chapters in the Foundations of O&M book, and they are the things that any O&M specialist knows. We really, we know it because the person's safety and well-being is in our hands. This is why O&M specialists carry insurance, because a person could get hurt in this endeavor, right? So we have to be very, very, very sharp in our skills, and we have to understand how to proceed to keep our students safe, but also become more capable in space. But the key to understanding the needs with CVI lies in the distinctly different ways that these students interpret the visual world. And I'm going to suggest that if you are an O&M specialist and you think that knowing CVI is for the teacher, it's for the OT, the PT, but it's not for you, because you already know O&M and you aren't going to change that because this is what all O&M people do. I'm going to suggest that you are putting your student at risk, because just as with educational principles or other issues related to CVI, the rules are different. And so we're going to talk about some of the characteristics and how they specifically impact a student relative to O&M. But the environment, the materials, and the social world is actually seen, but it's not interpreted, right? It's not really able to be deciphered. The characteristic visual behaviors associated with CVI are the key factors to understanding these distinctions between ocular and cortical visual impairments. I just want to take a little side trip here and say, you might be thinking in your mind, but what if the student has both? I will tell you that in most cases, and that's another topic and another presentation, but in most cases, the ocular component is not the cause of this child's visual impairment. It's a complicating factor, but it is not the major cause of their visual impairment. Most children with CVI would never be diagnosed with CVI if the eye doctor could find an ocular condition that answered the question of why this child doesn't use their vision the way other children their age do. So we're going to start with 9 characteristics. Why 9? Why 9? Some of you have this answer, you know it. It's because we don't really do programming for the characteristic of visual reflexes. So part 2 I'm going to talk about the considerations associated with individual CVI visual and behavioral characteristics. So we're going to start with color. I hope that by the time we get through these characteristics, it will be clear that it isn't business as usual for kids with CVI, that there are special rules and special considerations without which the child is not safe, without which the child is not oriented in space. So here we go, color. So remember that color is not a characteristic in which a child has a preferred color. That was true maybe in 2006. But now that we're in 2021, I hope everyone knows that color is a characteristic that changes, as all the characteristics do, as the child improves functional vision. And the characteristic of color will likely never resolve, because color will always remain more important for the student with CVI compared to a child with ocular visual impairment or no visual impairment. Okay, so we're going to think about the role of color in the child's environment. Here you see a naturally occurring color target like the exit sign. That's a great indicator of something important in space that is almost always color and often lights up. Here you see the next picture, you see this boy learning to use his cane, or he's using his cane on the stairs, but what's on the railing? So the cane's taking care of his lower field, and I don't want him looking at his feet. I'm not going to put color on the risers. I don't want him looking down. That's not safe. But I want him to be safe by anchoring himself on the railing. So we'll put color on the beginning and the end of the railing so he can anticipate where he is on those stairs. Traffic signs used to be black and white, but now we know they're vibrant color because color is more interesting to the brain and we're all likely to alert to it more. And then there are things like this crossing post that are naturally occurring again in the environment, used to keep pedestrians safe so that cars don't kind of bump up and come over the curb there. Now, this is going to be sort of dense, and I apologize for this. This is taken right out of the chapter that I talked about in the foundations class, but I want to just give you a little bit of an introduction for each characteristic. And each one of these characteristics, I'm going to highlight a few ways in which color is a potential O&M support, and ways in which color could be a possible hindrance. Okay, because it's, as with many of the characteristics, it can sometimes be a help and sometimes be something we have to really be very alert about for other reasons. So color can help with landmark identification. But color that exists on non-landmarks may be a distraction. So perhaps this individual's looking for, the bright blue mailbox at the corner, but right beyond that, or right before it, is a red news box. That red news box might actually interfere with that child's ability to find the mailbox. It can be used consistently on business signage, but color may unintentionally disorient someone. If there's color on, like if I was wearing this shirt, or if there was a color banner on a building. So sometimes there are these temporary banners that are really meant to grab your attention, right? Color can be used to locate forms of public transportation, like a bus and a taxi. They're in specific cities, they're often very specific colors. I think it's one of the problems we have with Uber and Lyft, right? We're never quite sure that's our car until we look at the license plate. But color of public transportation vehicles may vary from community to community. It's a support because color can help identify salient features of familiar people. The color associated salient features of people, however, may not be reliable. So if somebody's using hair color, like we saw with Griffin yesterday, or they're wearing a ball cap a lot, and then they don't, that person's really left adrift. Color, it consistently exists on certain indoor locations, as we saw, but these indicators vary in different indoor settings. So sometimes actually the colors of exit signs are different. So we have to be sure that we are really clear about what color exists in what specific environment. So let's talk about movement in O&M. These are examples, as you see, of different sources of movement. Movement from something in the environment, like a flag that's waving, or an adaptation you have maybe used in an environment to help a child locate their spot in the classroom. Movement of people. These are people in the street. Lots of counterintuitive, and counter directional movement. And then movement that happens from within the person when they're moving themselves. So this, remember that movement is a dorsal stream function, and it is something that is a go-to kind of a captivating characteristic. It can help detect the motion of vehicles, which can be helpful, but it may result in the individual approaching unsafe sources of movement. So as I've talked about before, I've seen children with CVI who really cannot move independently in some environments because they are so attracted just subconsciously to the movement of cars in the street that they just orient right toward the street constantly. It can help detect or confirm environmental cues, like a flag at a doorway or vibrant color on reflective tape. But again, non-landmark cues may compete. Movement can be used to preview environments. So if we use a YouTube or other instructor-made video, it's of tremendous help. I'll show you one later of an environment. This is a great technique to use to help someone learn a new environment, because movement and other things that happen on the iPad can be really helpful. However, some individuals have difficulty actually reinterpreting that in the real space. So sometimes movement can help keep a straight line of direction, especially if people are moving in the same direction. We're in a flow of movement and we're all moving in one direction. That can actually help keep that person with CVI safer. But if you're in this flow, sometimes that movement itself is all that person attends to, and they may miss the destination or the landmark because they are, again, captivated by this movement. It can help direct attention to the location of people or events beyond arm's reach. We know that most individuals with CVI can see a target that has movement at a greater distance than they can see a stationary object. But this may signal people, this is very important, this may signal people that if you can see your parent walking 10 feet away across the room, or you notice the dog running across the park, people may believe you can see everything at that distance, and that's not true. Okay, so wonder what this characteristic will be. Wonder what this one will be. Yes, it took a while, didn't it? It took a while because it's visual latency. So that's that delay response and actually noticing. I think this is one of the characteristics that people have told me they find most challenging to identify consistently in an individual. So let's just go through some of the pros and cons. Latency as a potential support. There are none. Can you think of a way in which latency would actually help a person be oriented in space or move safely through it? I could not. But it's definitely a hindrance sometimes. So one of the most challenging and fearful pieces of instruction for an O&M specialist is to try to help a person with CVI judge traffic. Why? Because they're not necessarily seeing that car in real time. And so where they think the car is not really where the car actually is. This is huge. I don't believe this occurs in the world of ocular visual impairment. You either see it or you don't, right? This isn't a yes or no thing. It's a how and when. Things that happen really quickly. It happens brief. It's just a brief, really quick thing. So somebody's waving their hand to say, I'm over here. I'm your Lyft, I'm your Uber, but it happens so quickly and latency doesn't allow that person to process it. They just wait and they don't know. Again, missing expressions of emotion or communication, gestures like, widening of eyes or thumbs up, it comes and goes before the person with CVI has a chance to really process it. It can impact their ability to judge spatial and temporal relations. So if we say, hey, Sally's about to pass you on the left, get ready, she's coming. We have to remember, if that person has latency, that they may not understand what that means, about to pass you. We may have to actually ask that person to sort of anchor themselves against something. And then finally, really difficult is that latency can result in unintentional contact with or potential harm. So if I see somebody moving down the hall toward me and I don't see them in real time, and I adjust my body or I move my power chair in a way that I think is, it's all clear, and I bump into somebody because of latency, I didn't judge that time and space correctly. Not everybody's going to want to be with you a second time, right? All right, so then let's talk for a moment about light. So light has some very important considerations for individuals with CVI. When we talk about light for people with ocular visual impairment, this is ridiculous. For ocular visual impairment, we talk about the type of light, the position of the light, and the intensity of the light. But there's much more to this for people with CVI. So this is also a dorsal stream characteristic. It's an automatic, unconscious response to notice light. And so there are ways in which light can help or pose a difficulty. All right. You see on the left that this person who's buying a ticket, like a metro ticket or a bus ticket, that it is a metro ticket, that their O&M specialist, a really fine O&M specialist, used this glow stick stuff for the teaching part of this, to say, you're going to get, insert your card on the right side. You're going to insert your card on the furthest slot on the right. Let me show you where that is. So during the instructional piece, until that person really learns that configuration, it's a way to help reduce the complexity by using light to highlight where to look. You see that there's this basketball hoop that's it has lights on it to help this person participate in this activity. A girl in a really complex environment who just defaults to the light. She cannot cope with all the complexity around her. The window at the end of this hallway, it's important to recognize, it's important to recognize if you are walking with a person with CVI and you're looking for, let's say in this case, you're looking for like a clinic office, and you're looking for room 127, and you're trying to find that as you go down the hallway. But this is the end of the hallway, are these doors. And beyond the doors is natural light, sunlight. This light may be an obstacle that makes it impossible for this person to look at the numbers, because that is so much more, it's so much more captivating. And then you see light below used for instruction. So,
do you want to answer a question or two first before we keep going?
I sure do.
Okay, one quick one is it latency in getting attention to the car, or in processing the location or speed, or both?
Both, all of it. So one person described to me, I thought this was really helpful in understanding latency. She said she doesn't like to watch TV because what she hears and what she sees happen in different time frames. So she hears it in real time, but the image kind of is beginning to process moments later. So it's like watching a really poorly dubbed movie where the sound and the image do not coordinate. How long can you stand that? Not very. So it's really about everything. It's about the distance, the time, it's all of it.
Okay, and one more, on the note of color, our town has emergency buttons that are blue in color, which is also this child's preferred color.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the problem is that everything falls apart when the flashing lights turn on and the siren goes off.
Yeah.
The moment the siren goes off, my child totally loses visual focus and the power wheelchair derails. So how does one make learning safety signs in the community a safe experience?
So what are they saying, that the individual pushes the button and it activates like the lights, the flashing lights and all of that? Is that what they're saying, you think? Maybe that person wants to.
Yes, that's what she said, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, then there needs, I would actually do a lot of previewing of that. And I would show on an iPad, I would show on a backlit surface, I would make a little video of approaching that spot, and I would talk about that blue light, and I would say, or that blue button, and say, this is really interesting to look at, but we have to do everything we can not to touch it, because once you do, it's very upsetting to you and very upsetting to the community. It has to be taught. And so it probably has to be taught off, like using a video preview. But then it would also, as soon as the child's moving toward it and you think they've spotted it, I would stop that person right then. I would stop them and say, all right, you see the button, you see the emergency button. Let's talk about what you do and what we don't do with that, right? We use it if there's a true emergency. It's really attractive to touch, but we're not allowed to. I would teach it. I would take a lot of time teaching it, because that, left to the person's own devices, that's just a really attractive thing. It's a really, really attractive thing. It's like somebody putting a sign up and saying, don't touch this. You have to. But you can suppress that need, that desire to touch it, if you have enough practice with that, especially if the result is so upsetting, so upsetting. Yeah. And the other thing you could do, you could audio record. You could do the preview, but also record the result of what happens if you press it. Because if that's a really an aversive thing, so the desire to touch it is huge. The desire to have the result is not. I would play that to say, remember, this is what happens. We don't want that to happen. It's too upsetting, right? I would preview it and teach it a lot. But this is why in O&M, one of the things we teach right away, one of the very, very, very first things we teach is the word stop. Because knowing when you need somebody to stop, that's one of the most important safety things we can teach them. Stop because there's a step. Stop because there's, whatever it is. Stop, there's a person you're going to run into. Stop. That is one of the most important things to start with. And I think that it's really well done. It's well accomplished with young kids, where you can make it a game, but it's something to continue to be reinforced. Even people who use dog guides, the animal itself knows when to disobey and stop, right? So we need to help your children, your students, understand that's a non-negotiable command. When I say stop, that's serious, right? I wouldn't let anybody go out in the community independently until they learn stop. I wouldn't let them even go out with me until they learn stop. Yesterday, I mentioned yesterday about the boy that was so busy and had such really difficult motor skills and balance and things. And when I opened my clinic door for him to go out to the hallway to do this little exercise in the hall, he took off, and I said, stop. And he didn't. He's 2. And I had to run my tail off, because I knew the chance of him getting hurt was really great. And so guess what I put in the report? That he needs O&M, and the first thing he needs to learn is to respond to stop, because it's a very big, and you can there are a lot of games kids play anyway, right? That you can just reinforce that concept in a fun way, but make sure they understand it's serious. Yeah, that must be a nightmare. Any other questions? No?
Nope, I think we're good at the moment.
Okay, so we talked about light. I think I described light in various ways when I showed the images, but I do want to say, as in terms of a potential support, remember backlighting is, if you're going to do any kind of map work, backlighting using an iPad or some tablet device can be really helpful, really helpful. And you can always use supplemental light like you saw in the images as a way to help. So as an O&M person or a teacher going with a child or a parent, just tuck a flashlight in your pocket somewhere, a little one, because that can help really draw attention to what you're trying to show the child. Even if it's an elevator button, it doesn't light up until you touch it. So knowing where to touch a light can be really helpful. But not all lighted targets are safe, right? So vehicle headlights are not safe. There are a lot of like places where they're doing work, construction on a sidewalk, or even within a building, sometimes have those yellow flashing lights. You might as well just say, come straight here, person with CVI, come straight here, because it will really draw their attention, okay? Oh, I wanna mention this last one on the potential hindrance side. That an individual with CVI may, and I bet you've seen this, use ceiling lights so that when they're walking down a hallway, they want to walk right down the middle of the hallway if the lights are in the center, and they're using those lights as sort of their guide for a straight line of direction. It's really better if we can teach landmarks and salient features of the environment, because walking straight down the middle of the hallway pretty much only works if nobody else is in the hall. Okay. All right, visual fields. I think I missed a picture. So let's talk about field preferences. Pretty much all individuals with CVI have areas where they see better and where they don't see as well. I want to show you, I'm going to talk a lot about a use of a cane relative to field preferences here, but I'm also going to talk about a cane later. But if you look at what I'd like you to attend to here are in the two bottom pictures, the one on the left, the one on the right, the head position of these students. This is one of the classic examples of what we might call eccentric viewing, but really may reflect something even a little broader, which is a field preference. So I ask people to make sure they don't straighten a child's head, work with the OTs and PTs about this whole conflict around midline, what to do, what not to do. Okay, but lower field losses are the most common and extremely risky for a person with CVI. So I don't know what the statistic is currently, but when I was studying O&M, I remember distinctly being told that there are more serious accidents for people with visual impairment on steps than in traffic. Steps are very dangerous. So the way it's a support, the only thing I can say here that where it would be a support is that the individual with CVI may demonstrate decreased levels of difficulty with complexity in the non-dominant field. You're turning your head. There's a whole field out here, where I'm not really attending to, I don't really see that information. So maybe it's a possible reduction of complexity, but that's a stretch, right? But it's a hindrance in many ways, as we said before, not being able to alert to. So if I can't see the complexity of what's over here, I might also not be seeing the swing that's coming toward me, or the person, or the other wheelchair. I'm gonna miss a lot of information. Obstacles on the floor, drop-offs, all of those things in the lower field are really difficult. Remember, it's not that child's projected out lower field, it's the sheer drop-off visual field. If you have a mask on, have you noticed how if you're in a stairway, it's sort of scary because you're not seeing with full visual fields in your lower field like you used to? If I'm alone in the staircase, I'm perpetually pulling my mask down because I'm really not seeing where I used to see. That's where the lower field loss is, in that extreme lower field. Okay, so let's move to the next one. So the next one is complexity. Yeah, this is not a problem, is it? Not at all. Of course, this is a huge problem. And complexity is the object itself, the visual array, the sensory environment, and of course, faces. So if you see the young man in the top left picture, he is actually able to travel fairly independently. in this non-complex array. He has some really nice cues, not only textural cues, but a little bit of color that helps him know how to keep a straight line of direction there. But the same individual is the guy that you see in the picture to the right of that. And he lives at least part of the time in a very, very, very big city. And so he needs much more support there. And he really is not probably going to go anywhere unaccompanied or without someone fairly close by. Playgrounds, classrooms, all of it very, very complex. So again, there's not much you can say about complexity that's a support, but there's a lot of things you can say about it being a hindrance. Not being able to even locate the sign because there's too much other stuff in the background. Not being able to locate a car, a person, because of complexity of array. Faces will make it extremely difficult for a person with CVI to even recognize like their companion if they get too far away in a novel environment. Okay, the complexity of the sensory array can increase fatigue, frustration, and anxiety. And if a person is anxious because there's so much commotion going on around them and they can't interpret it, their safety goes down profoundly. If you are highly anxious, you are not safe, right? So that the greater the sensory environment, the greater the competing noise and the counter direction of people, the more difficult that person is going to, difficult time they're going to have remaining oriented in space. Distance viewing is another one of the really important characteristics of CVI. And this one has a massive impact on CVI. I think when I write my reports for the kids that I see in clinic, and I'm recommending O&M for most of them, I always come to the I talk about all of the characteristics, but lower fields and distance are the ones I feel like people understand the best in terms of the need. Individuals with CVI, even when they have a normal eye exam, are unable to process information beyond arm's reach or further. Maybe they can do it at 4 feet or 6 feet or 8 feet. But as that complexity increases, depending upon the familiarity and complexity of the environment, their ability to visually attend to a target will decrease. So this is, remember I said about movement. A moving target may be perceived at a greater distance, but I don't want someone to think everything is perceived at that distance, because it's not. And so things that occur at greater distances can be confusing to the O&M specialist, because they may have an expectation that because you have a normal eye exam, you should be able to see that target. Or yesterday, you noticed all the stop signs. What happened today? Well, what happened today was we went out at a different time of day and there was a lot more traffic and a lot more noise, and now I can't see as well. And that's literally what people with CVI say. When the more noise there is, the less I can see. So think of how this disrupts the O&M instructor, or any instructor who's with a child with CVI and thinks, I saw you do this yesterday. Why can't you do it today? And the great myth about CVI is that children with CVI have vision that varies all the time, right? But we know it's not really that their vision varies. It's that the environment varies. And so without somebody providing appropriate instruction and helping that person with CVI themselves know, this is probably, it's 5 o'clock. I'm coming out of PT. I think I'm going to need you to be closer to me because there's so much noise on the road that's near this PT center. Okay. I want to explain this Mylar curtain that you see at the bottom right. This was used to help a person with CVI learn to drive a power wheelchair. So they were in this open space, and when the person was in their power chair, all they did was go in circles. They just went in circles. So it's so important to remember that when we're trying to teach an individual to move forward, whether it's in PT or OT or just classroom stuff or O&M, we always should pair that direction with a target. Once we put a red shiny target up there, this is actually something the person like wheeled through with their wheelchair to understand that they were getting closer and then touching it and then it was behind them. There were a lot of positional concepts that could be taught here. Until we did that, this person just went in circles. So we have to always pair this process with a target. I'm always amazed by that. Like, you know, this child's in their gait trainer or their you know, kid walker, what have you, and they don't know where to go. And all of us usually, just think about this. You don't really just get up and move under most circumstances. Usually there's something you're moving toward. But what if your vision doesn't permit you to find that target? We shouldn't be surprised. Or what if your therapist doesn't give you a target to look at that you can access? A suspended, vibrant, fluorescent beach ball or something. Don't be surprised if that person's not motivated to move. So some of the hindrances are things I mentioned, the sensory environment, you know, the inability to see things under complex situations, not being able to identify the very revealing information about, you know, people, lights, traffic, other identifying factors. At distance, a person really can't judge safety or predict or confirm their options for using alternate routes. Okay, because that distance, they may not know in time, you know, that they're supposed to, that there's a roadblock down there. I didn't see it till I got right up against it. So visual novelty is, this is more than being able to look at new things. Remember, visual novelty is one of the most all-encompassing characteristics and one that I hope we think about all the time.
Jane, do you like some questions before we keep going?
Sure.
Okay. What to do if a person with CVI keeps staring at the lights in the ceiling as opposed to attending what's in front of them?
So can you turn the lights off? And if not, if they can't, so what we want to do is make the target that they're trying to attend to move to more intrusive than anything else in the environment. So if they're staring at the lights ahead of them, above them, this is where if you cannot turn off the lights, then I would use a light that has really bright color. And if they don't have a seizure disorder that makes it impossible to do this, use a flashing light, because that addition of color, light, and movement will be more powerful than stationary light. So you have to kind of get into the brain and think, what is more intrusive here? What will work better? What I also want to say is if that person cannot get away from the lights as they're moving, then they're not safe to move independently. They're just not. So, and that's something we have to also face, is that some individuals will need to have that assistance they'll have to have some assistance or somebody nearby. If they're not, if their functional vision, if their CVI range score indicates that they're really not able to get away from the lights. Persons in phase 1, tiny bit into phase 2, they may not be able to look away from the lights. So either try a more intrusive target, turn the lights off, or give that person more assistance. Does that make sense?
Okay, and one more, can you please reference the book that these are in again?
It's Foundations of Orientation and Mobility. Did I say 4th edition? I think it's 4th. It hasn't come out yet. But and there's this, you know, it's all, yeah, it's a pretty dense chapter. If anybody, I'm not allowed to say this, but let's just say theoretically, if somebody wasn't going to purchase the book because they're not planning on becoming an O&M instructor, because it's a 2-volume set and it's very expensive, there may be a person who would share that specific chapter with them if that person was contacted directly. It could happen. Okay?
All right. Do you want one more?
Yes.
Okay. How much does concept development influence O&M from rote to route? If they have an understanding of the concept and need to pay attention visually, does that help, or are we looking at straight visual abilities?
No, so it all counts. So as we talk about so one of the things that can help a person get from rote to route is to teach them the salient features of the guidelines along the way. So one of the things I'll do, for example, is talk about things that are up high, things that are lower, things that are that make noise. We're near the drinking fountain, it makes noise. I also will do things to help build these concepts and to build out the information more broadly. You saw a picture in the very first slide. I'm going to go back to it if I can. Hang on one sec. I'm going to try to escape. Well, I'll just describe it to you. In the very first slide, there was a picture of a boy with a felt board in front of him, and he had photographic images of land and of pieces of, they were landmarks, and also some cues. So what we did was, his job was to take things off the board. So it could be like, a park bench and a clock and a drinking fountain, an exit sign, a flag that was outside of a particular door all the time. And his job was to pull them off the board as soon as he saw them. So what I was trying to teach him to do is to become active in his environment, to look for these things rather than passively just knowing the beginning and the end. But I also have to do the concept development by teaching him not just the salient visual features. How do we know this is a drinking fountain and not, what else would be out there? A fire extinguisher. How do we know it's not? I have to teach that as well. And then I have to help generalize it. Where else would we see a fire extinguisher, right? Where else would we maybe see one? And then I have to build a map, and I'm going to talk about maps too. I have to help build a map so that this child has a chance to represent this space. We can also not only have the child pull things off when he sees them, but put them in a certain order. I could give him 2 pictures and say, okay, we have the drinking fountain and we have the exit sign. We're leaving my office right now. Which one of these will we see first? Or which one will take longer to walk to? Temporal relations. All of these things. Think of how this builds spatial concepts in a child's brain. And think about how children who cannot walk independently desperately need this. They are really kind of at our mercy. So all of these concepts get built in as well. And I hope to talk about some of those as we progress through this. Any more?
Nope, you're good. Thank you.
Okay, so these images, this boy, there's a person under this jacket outside on the playground. This is an actual picture of an actual child with CVI and how he copes with all of the sensory information and even novelty that he encounters when he goes outside. But children who are able to develop really deep visual schemes, salient features, concepts again, they are able to actually see new materials and new environments and connect them to previous ones. So let's just talk about this a little more specifically. So how can novelty be a help to a child? Well, an individual with CVI may be less distracted by incidental visual information. And again, it's a stretch. Like, is that a good thing that you don't notice those things along the route? Well, I guess if you're that child who stops constantly to look at every single thing, maybe I can get to the lesson a little more efficiently if I can teach you specifically the targets we're looking for, and you're not distracted by everything else. But I don't think so. I think most of novelty is a hindrance, because this is where we see children with CVI not gathering the information they need to gather incidentally to actually be oriented in space. So my classic exercise that almost every child with CVI is asked to do when they come to see me is to go on some simple little route, go outside the door, go into the hallway, do an activity, and then I kind of walk them away to another part of the hallway and say, show me how to get back to my office. And I think I've mentioned to you, I think I can count on one hand the number of kids I've seen who can do that. And why can't they? Because they're not the least bit oriented in space. They're moving through space, they're not bumping into things, but they're not noticing the incidental information that creates a picture in their mind of where they are. They didn't even remember that I came out this door right behind me. They don't know because they didn't really gather that information to start with. So this is where teaching salient features becomes huge, okay? This is where we cannot assume that even if a child has been exposed to something many times, that they have really understood what they've seen. This is also the part where the characteristic that's responsible for kids not enjoying a new experience or going to a new place because it's just too much novelty. There is a solution to some of this. And then the last of these 9 that we'll talk about is the visual motor characteristic. And here you see some examples of children kind of looking away and then trying to reach, but not quite getting their hand where they want it to be. And so this one doesn't have a huge bearing on O&M, but a few things. So it can be a hindrance because individuals with CVI may have some difficulty looking and reaching with accuracy in social situations. This is the person who, if you do a community outing, might be the most likely one to knock their drink over. You know, they're at a new table, they're not used to this table, their drink is in front of them and they go to reach for it, but they kind of look away. It's a lot of novelty they're surrounded by and they knock their drink over, right? That doesn't make for a really great social moment for this child. The individual CVI, you know, is doing a group activity and they reach to dip their paintbrush in the paint and they miss a little bit, they hit the edge of the paint dish and it spills everywhere. That's a real thing that happened at one of those, you know, you paint it kind of pottery places. That was a field trip and it was really unfortunate because this child's classmates moved away from this child pretty dramatically and stayed away. The individual's CVI may misplace their cane, so they don't quite coordinate that the way they hope to. If they're reaching toward a door handle or a button on an elevator, they may push the wrong thing or they may actually inadvertently touch a person, which can not always result in great social acceptance. That, you know, that's actually a very important issue. We know a lot of kids with CVI who will actually take your hand and want your hand to do the action that their hand can't quite do. So again, be very sensitive about hand under hand and help facilitate that child accomplishing that themselves if you can, because of, you know, the zone of proximal development. All right, part 3, let's talk a little bit more about CVI complex needs and O&M solutions. The decision for O&M should not be based on the complexity of the needs of the student, of that student's level of complex needs. It's not feasible for the O&M specialist to understand all of their needs, and therefore it is so critical that we collaborate with our other team members. The provider does not have to achieve expertise in related fields, but must be willing to work with them collaboratively. And, you know, I have seen this work beautifully in some places. I've seen O&M lessons where I'm not exactly sure if I'm new to this group, like, tell me again which person is the O&M and which person's the PT, because they're really working so closely together, which is a beautiful thing. I don't think you should consider having a child who uses AAC conduct their O&M lesson without their AAC. Like, when is a better time to be able to express your needs, right? So we have to work with all of these individuals, and this is not, just like there's not vision time, there shouldn't be O&M time in isolation of other things. Just a real quick reminder here about something that can help, and this is an example of getting out of our professional silos a bit. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, are aware of the gross motor function classification system. And I think this can be a really helpful thing to just brush up on if you don't know it. Because there are these levels of kids who, level 1 are children who have motor challenges, but they walk, well, level 1 is children who walk without limitations. Level 2 are children who walk with limitations. And there's a description for all of this that goes more in depth. Level 3 walks using a handheld mobility device, and you see that the picture of that, or using a wheelchair. 4 is self-mobility with limitations, may use powered mobility. And 5 is the child who needs to be transported in a manual wheelchair. And so be aware of these differences, because what I'm asking you to really think about is, if this person is at level 3, okay, we should not wait. Let's just say level 4, that they use, self-mobility, but with limitations. We should not say that until they learn to move more independently, they shouldn't get O&M. We have to understand where they are and then make accommodations at that spot. This is not a series of prerequisites that when you get stronger and more independently mobile, we'll be able to offer you O&M. It's not that at all. Okay, but be aware of these classifications and know the challenges that go with it. So, as I said a moment ago, how can I be effective in O&M without knowledge of AAC? And really, I can't. It's just really important, if you have a child trying to be oriented in space or move through it, we need to find out what they're thinking, what they need, what they want. Are they comfortable? Do they want to go forward? Is there a place they would like to go? Imagine. And so a little bit about cane use. So cane use, again, so I have known many, many parents who have ordered their own canes for their children and just hope for the best, because their child is in that group of 75% of children, or 55% by another indication, who don't get O&M. And they really want their child to have the opportunity to move more freely. And by the way, what happens when if you look at this picture of this young lady, you'll see, look at where her head is. She's facing out. Her vision is now available for her to examine her environment. And the cane is there to anchor her to the environment and to detect textures, drop off, surface changes. She doesn't have to now be obsessed with looking at her feet or looking at the ground. The cane is a very freeing thing. And though I know there is an absolute formula for providing a cane to a child, I am not going to scold a parent whose child is not getting O&M, who tries to take matters in their own hands. It's not okay. But what would you do if you were that parent? So by all means, really, really recruit the assistance of an O&M person. But what I'm going to say is, don't be surprised if you see families who have decided they're going to read some books themselves and try to do this. I also want to say something about, I don't know if I have a slide in here for this. Yeah, that this particular young lady's using a folding cane, and I recommend a rigid cane that does not fold as a first cane for a child, because they'll get more sensory feedback. Every one of the breaks in that shaft break up and reduce the amount of sensory input that comes back through her cane, from the ground, through the cane, into her hand, into her arm, into the rest of her body. So again, a parent who just sort of takes matters into their own hands might use a folding cane because it's more readily available. But my preference is that we use a rigid cane in the beginning. You also see the red ball tip there. The larger the surface area for that tip, the more sensory information is sent back to the brain through the hand, the body. I think it's impressive that if you look at this young girl, she even has proper hand position and hand technique. That index finger extended forward is pretty beautiful. So if we think about the cane by characteristic, remember that individuals with CVI are drawn and captivated by sources of movement. Therefore, when people with CVI are in environments of movement, they're not as oriented in space and they're not safe. The long cane can assist the individual to become anchored in the environment at times when functional vision is less reliable. So movement is going to be so powerful in the mind of that person that when there's a lot of movement, they need to be anchored more. And the cane will help them with that. This is literally a picture of a person using a cane who is so attracted to movement and so disoriented that she literally walked out in between the cars. And this is some pedestrian helping this person, literally walked out into traffic. Visual fields that we talked about the lower field, that the use of a long cane can assist in detecting obstacles on the ground and locating drop-offs. This is just a pure and simple safety issue. By the way, lots of people who have CVI, when they are examined in a clinical setting, appear to have normal field function. And when we do a functional vision assessment in a variety of environments or CVI range functional vision assessment, we find out something very different. Trust your functional vision assessment and also recognize that almost all people with CVI have lower field challenges. Complexity. When individuals with CVI have difficulties identifying and interpreting information that is present in a complex array. Remember, looking is not interpreting. You can see something, but can you interpret it? So many indoor and outdoor environments cannot be controlled for complexity. I can't go into Target and say, okay, guess what? Get everything off the shelves because we're coming in. So what do? I'm going to give you some kind of some kind of support. We're going to use a compensatory tool to help you stay more anchored, right? Now, if you have memorized your corner store, you might not need your cane. But if you're going into a new store you've never been in, the cane may be necessary. It's not a yes or no, all or nothing proposition. Many children with CVI don't use their cane in their classroom. Some don't even use it in their school. Some do, okay? In terms of novelty, again, having that cane will help the person feel more secure about where they are in space so that they can actually confirm location and salient features, especially in novelty. When you ask a person who can tell us about their CVI, what is the difference between a familiar and an unfamiliar environment? They will often tell, at least have told me, it's the difference between understanding where you are and being lost in a fun house, just lost. So this is, so individuals with CVI are often not perceived in society as visually impaired. This is my friend Dagbjorn, who lives in Iceland. The use of the long cane can help appropriately identify the problem. So this is a tricky area, right? When I first say to families, your child is now, moving around in their chair, or they're learning to use their gait trainer, or they're, A, B, or C. I think it might be helpful to pair this up with a cane. That can be really jarring to a family because it's just such an outward manifestation that you're visually impaired. And that may be a bad thing for some families, or a challenging thing. But the good thing is it's an outward manifestation that you're visually impaired. And so getting back to what I talked about yesterday, about how it's really important to let a person know about their visual impairment so they can have agency, over that. The cane is a way to sort of help that person understand that when you're out in the environment, people might be really, really confused about what's going on with you. And so, Dagun, when I met her, she was 20, I think 25 and something. And I met her in a cafe. She was not alone. She was with a companion. And I watched her come in. I watched her leave. And I said, you really need a cane. And she wasn't sure that was at all for her. And so I'm going to let you hear what she has to say about it herself. Wait. So can you tell me a little bit about how life was for you before you had your cane? For example, maybe at like a bus stop or a curb out in public.
I did not do anything else but fall. I just fell and fell and fell. So, for example, at a bus stop, when stepping on, I wouldn't be able to see the steps. And if I managed to step on, the driver would drive away quickly. So I have actually fallen on a bus floor because the driver drove away too quickly. So that's dangerous.
That's very dangerous, and I'm sure really upsetting. I would think upsetting.
Right? It is. It is upsetting.
And what happened after the cane?
After the cane, I can go to the bus stop and step on the bus, no problem. And the driver let me find a seat and sit down before they start driving again.
Interesting. And so is the cane helpful because it helps you know where you are in space, or because other people also recognize what's going on with you?
I would say it's kind of mixed thing, People know that I am visually impaired and they give me time, for example, at the store to find things and put it in the cart and go to the cashier and pay and stuff. And also if I'm walking across the street, the car will stop for me and let me walk across the street before they start driving again.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I appreciate your input. Okay, talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon.
Okay, so that's I think a really again, Dagun can tell us about her CVI, and that then can help reflect back to think about all the kids who can't tell us about their CVI. I think we can assume a lot of the things can be really the same, right? But what about, what about using a cane with a walker, a gait trainer, a wheelchair, or other device? Is that just off limits then? Because obviously Dagun can move her own body independently. So I guess it's not quite as surprising that she would use a cane, though she hadn't for 26 years. But what if you don't walk independently? Does that mean the cane's out? When do we add a cane or mobility device in a child's world? And what about children who are not able to move their bodies without assistance? They have the right to understand the space they are in and to predict or interpret their surroundings. So I would suggest that it may be even more critical, certainly not less, for a child who is not able to move their own body to have the right to know where they are in space, what's next to them, what's in front of them, what's behind them, and to please think about not just moving them without asking them, right? So would I get behind Dagun and just simply move her forward and say, okay, there we are, we're at the lunch counter now? No, I would do other things to see if she's ready to move. But we have very little hesitation to do that with somebody in a wheelchair. We just move them. We just, off you go. What do you think that does to that person's sense of who they are in the world, about their own strength, about their own talk about zone of proximal development. I mean, they're at the place of full support. What about something like, so we're going to go over to the lunchroom in just a moment. I want you to think about whether you want to try to move yourself a little bit. You want to use the power chair? Do you want me to push you? Let me know what you're thinking, right? It's important to ask. And let's say, I think I have a picture here. Let's say that person wants to use their cane while they're being pushed or while they're using their wheelchair. Can that happen? Can a person make their wheelchair go and still have a cane? I would say they can. I've done this. You can attach a cane to a wheelchair. You can use, you have to sort of jury it up and make it work, but it can. And so the person, all they do, it's really interesting, is that when we did this person moved their wheel with one hand and kept their other hand on the cane, resting their arm on the armrest, but holding the cane as they moved. And what was fascinating was that this person noticed that the cane was finding things before their chair was. And that was huge. Like, yep, we better stop because your cane just found the wall. Your cane just found there's something on the floor. We better stop. This is a way to help a person predict their environment and to have more awareness and, again, agency over it. I want to say too that vision is the anticipatory sense. When we watch, just by virtue of our vision, we can watch what's happening around us and get a sense of what's about to happen next, right? The teacher grabs her lunch bag and, gets the student's lunch bag or puts something of the students over their shoulder, and you begin to think, and the teacher might glance up at the clock or look at their watch, and you start to think, oh, we're getting ready to go to lunch. Cool. What if you have CVI and none of those cues are available to you? Someone just takes your wheelchair and off you go, pushes you. And then we ask these students, we say, why aren't they more independent? They just want us to do everything for them. You're giving them the exact message that that's what you expect of them. So this thing about not giving a child a cane before they are able to fully use one independently should be rethought, I think. You see at the top, and you see a picture at the bottom where there are these tandem canes. Great idea. Not many kids will hold a cane the first time you put it in their hand. And that's often where it just stops. It's like, well, he dropped his cane. He's not doing it. He's not ready. Well, a lot of kids are real sensitive about what's in their hand. So a tandem cane can allow the child, if you see that top picture where my cursor is here, and this is also a form of a tandem cane. This tandem cane can help this individual have the freedom to sometimes drop the cane, but it doesn't mean the whole cane falls to the ground. We can sort of slow down, say, let's try again. Can you find the grip? You ready? It also gives this individual a great deal of security, knowing that this other person is paralleling their action. It's a very cool thing. Okay. All right, let's talk in the last little bit here about previewing. So maps and previewing. Maps are one of the most cognitive exercises you can offer to a person, including a person with CVI. And now many of you are going to go through this moment during this in which you say, well, I can't get there without GPS. So that made you go from being a large space traveler to more of a route or possibly road traveler. If I were your O&M specialist, I would expect more of you. But GPS has made us all so much less skillful. I mean, maybe it's more reliable, maybe not. So a map is a representation of space that depicts relationships between elements of an environment. Okay, so if we're trying to help this person interpret, not just see the world, but interpret it, if we're trying to get them as close to that bird's eye view as possible, perhaps we need to make some kind of representation that they can begin to hold in memory. We can do it with familiar spaces, novel spaces, connected environments such as neighborhoods, isolated settings such as a kitchen or backyard. You can make a map of now we're going to go and we're going to make cookies in the home ec room. Do they still have home ec rooms? What do they call them now? I'm sure it's not home ec. And what was economic about home ec anyway? Anyway, I digress. But we again, I think about how many times we have a child we work with a person with CVI, we guide them into a space, we don't explain it to them, their eyes are open, so we assume they've got it. They don't bump into anything, so we assume they've got it. They don't got it. They have no idea what all these things are and how they're connected and where they are relative to one another, much less how this kitchen in home ec is like their kitchen at home, is like the kitchen at their daycare or at their grandmother's house. No idea. This is our job. This is our job to not only teach them in the moment, but help develop comparative thought. This is another example, by the way, of a stairwell that has that color highlighting at the beginning and the end of the stairs. So maps can be designed. So a map is not just a map. A map can be many, many, many things. It can be designed using 3D materials like an object map. Be careful though, because miniatures of something are often not translatable into the real thing. Do not think that a little miniature phone booth is going to help this person know that there's a little phone station within the school. It really doesn't translate all that well. So don't spend, I would suggest that you not spend hours and hours and hours and hours trying to find a miniature water fountain and a miniature door and a miniature this, because the miniatures often do not translate into what is really there in real space. If you can't wrap your arms around it, if it's too big to be taken in all at once and vision won't give it to you, it's important that you teach the salient features of that target. And you can do that using language, and you can represent it with a shape or a color, because that may in fact end up being more accessible. Maps can be designed using, again, representational symbols or shapes. They can be dynamic or electronic. They can be both, right? You can have like a Velcro map or a picture map, or you can also pair that with a dynamic map that shows this on an iPad or other tablet device, computer screen. Maps in all orientation in space must be paired with systematic language that includes salient visual features and comparative thought. So this Target store, for example, has a sign with a big red circle, like the red circle we see on the sign of the Red Dot store when we buy snacks. If we only teach isolated pieces of information and they don't extend intentionally beyond this one thing, we are basically beating rote travel into this person's brain. But if we say, well, I'll be darned, this is like, this also has a red circle on the sign. Now we know two kinds of signs that have red circles. Interesting. Wonder what they have inside. Are they selling the same things? So this comparative language and the use of salient visual features will help sort of extend this learning and help it really supersede the moment and become a much greater concept. And I want to say I'm talking here again about children who are nonverbal, children who you think might not necessarily get this. If you model it, if you present it, if you use consistent language, I think you'll be really surprised about what these students can understand and get. Okay, so video previewing. This really occurred to me through a series of events, most of which had to do with observations of children with CVI loving their iPad. If I ask a parent of a child with CVI, does your child like TV? A little. Yeah, some shows. What do they prefer to watch? Oh, their iPad. They're all about their iPad. And what on their iPad do they watch? Well, either a favorite show or two or YouTube. YouTube is huge. It's just huge in the CVI community. And why is that? Why is that? Well, it's huge because the person with CVI has control over the video. They can watch it over and over and over. They can slow it down. They can stop it. They can enlarge an image. They can do so many things with this video that they cannot do with an image on their TV. If the sound needs to be turned off for a while because the sound and the sight don't happen at the same time and you want to concentrate on one and then the other and then both together, you can do that. So these dynamic or moving images have been one of the biggest tools that really help kids with CVI. The attraction to movement can be used again as a very positive thing in helping a person preview an environment to help reduce anxiety, help them visually be able to predict what they're going to see, to have some control over it, and to also compare this to other experiences. We can use not only backlighting, but vibrant color can be added. The ability to control the speed, the sound, and the level of complexity. It can be reviewed repeatedly. I would suggest if you make a video preview that you not ever get rid of it, that you create files called My Environments or My Places. So this person may just get a kick out of someday, you know how you go back and look at your photographs in your computer just to remind yourself of these lovely things you've done. They can be used for instruction, but also just because the person wants to think about their environments. The O&M specialist can create a video using a phone or an iPad to illustrate orientation, space, sequence of landmarks, and salient features of a route or environment. This helps with temporal relations, like how close or far away are these features from one another, and approximate time to various parts of the screen or the setting. So we're going to come in the front door, we're going to walk to the end of this hallway. It's going to take us a little bit of time, and here's what we're going to see while we're going there. Okay, maybe take us a minute or so. The student can use these videos to reduce novelty of the route, to learn landmarks, and to become sensitized to the potential distractors of the setting. This is a restaurant, it's noisy in there some of the time. Let's listen to what that noise is like, because you might hear it. If it's lunchtime, you're probably going to hear this kind of noise. You're going to hear dishes clanking and people walking. You're going to hear doors opening and closing. Hugely helpful to be able to predict, like, okay, I think I'm ready for that. The video of the same environment under various conditions will help support predictability and reduce novelty. Just as we cannot teach or assess a child with CVI under a controlled setting only or familiar setting only, we want to be able to offer the options to say, sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like that. So, looking at this part of, I'm going to show you this little very, very short video that shows a preview of a student going into a restaurant. I'm doing a little bit of a narrative here. That's the other thing to be careful of. Do not constantly talk. You don't have to describe every single thing around you. Oh, there are planks on the floor. The floor is sort of fake wood, but there are planks. The planks are horizontal. They move, they come perpendicular from the door. You don't need all of that. Right? You need to really help this person notice what's going to help them be safe and predict what they're going to see. Okay, let's have a look. Looking at this part of the restaurant that had booths and tables, and now I'm going to turn. There's that sailboat sign. Look, it's near a flag picture. I'm going to turn past the pictures on the wall. I'm turning around, and now my back is to the door with the exit sign. And I'm going to walk forward. Here we go. This would be the way out now. I'm just reversing my route. Okay. So it's not rocket science, right? but there are really specific techniques to remember. And so if I'm trying to teach, so the language I used, I didn't say I'm turning 180 degrees. I didn't say that. That wasn't part of what our instruction was about, but I did say I'm turning around and now my back is to the door. These are concepts that will be really helpful and to, again, be able to predict. Don't use things that are going to change. So that sailboat sign is literally always there, or I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't have selected that. So I believe that all humans have an innate right to know where they are in space. It's just not fair for a child to be captured in a chair, a beanbag, on a mat, you know, in a class, on a classroom chair. It's not okay to have them have to be basically prisoner to the position you place them in without knowing where they are in space. They might as well be on an isolated island out in the middle of the sea. They have no concept of what's around them, and that's not fair, and that's not just, and that's not appropriate. It's really important for the person to know what's around them. And because this person might look like they're looking at the environment, please remember, seeing is not interpreting. They need to be able to know where they are. They have an agency about where they are moved or to move themselves, to predict, anticipate, and interpret changes in their environment, and to feel they are a part of an environment, not lost in it. Not lost in it. And this image is of a little girl who, every time I see her, she either has a hat on or her jacket with a hood. And when the going gets rough or the environment gets complex, up comes the hood. Okay, this is another compensatory skill. Would it be helpful if I helped her understand what was happening, if I showed her a video? Yeah, there's going to be some commotion every day about 11 o'clock, because that's when the PT and OT come in, and they always talk for a couple minutes, and then the teacher moves some furniture around, and so we get the mat off the wall. I mean, it just gives this person a sense of self, a sense of, oh, I'm part of this environment. I'm not just showing up in it every day. Okay. Oops. So this is sort of my parting shot for this. Presumed competence. Individuals with CVI experience a counterintuitive form of deprivation. They can see the world around them, but have difficulty interpreting what is seen. Therefore, the ability of an individual with CVI to demonstrate their competence, their true abilities, what they really have inside of them, it increases not only as they are simply exposed to visual experiences, but more importantly, when a powerful person mediates and helps interpret what is seen, and we must be their mediators. So there's Jim. This picture of Jim is great because he's, obviously holding up this bridge. Look how strong he is. But what I really want you to notice are the shadows of the people that are sort of in front of him. Those are his parents. And those are his powerful mediators. Those are the people who have helped him see his true abilities, who have given him not just a huge variety of experiences, but have helped him interpret what is seen. Okay? And I really want to thank all the families who shared images of their children for this presentation, to the Bridge School who has shared images, and to CVI Speak AAC, where I have received some images also. I always say that families are absolutely my true north. Okay.